Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and thanks to your kind contributions, I've been made aware of a recent video by the somewhat oxymoronically titled YouTube channel Rational Religion, claiming to have scientific evidence for God. Now, I'm sure I've heard this before somewhere, and, I'm open-minded, but, well, let's just take a look, shall we?
In our last video, we showed that just because you can't see, hear, or measure something, doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in it.
Now this is a fair point, besides from the fact that it's an obvious straw man and that no atheist I've ever spoken to actually considers the argument that you can't see God to be one of any kind of credibility. But that aside, I think a lot of apologists could take a leaf out of your book, because a lot of them claim that something like evolution, for instance, although you can observe evidence for its happening, you can't observe it directly, and therefore it can't be proven to be true. But in fact, you're right, certain things can be believed or proven to be true despite the fact that you can't necessarily observe them directly.
Be it dark matter or love. We all believe in things which you can't break down and put in a test tube.
I think that if we consider the experience of love to be due to chemical reactions in the brain or as a result of evolutionary processes, then we can break it down and we can find out what it's all about through means of biological and chemical experimentation. And the same for dark matter in the realm of physics. We might not fully understand what it is now or why it exists, but given enough time, if we do uncover what it is and why it exists, then I'm sure that we can experiment upon it.
If God exists and he's, the creator of the universe, we wouldn't really expect him to be physically measurable because he's not a physical person, like you or John the local milkman, or Mrs. Singh at the post office. It's good to be diverse. Having said this, just because we can't measure God directly doesn't mean we can't see signs of his existence in his creation. If God did make everything, you would assume that there'd be some fairly obvious signs that he made it.
Yeah, like some kind of historically accurate written account or document that isn't riddled with contradictions both with its own self and experimental observations, and isn't entirely morally corrupt from beginning to end.
For instance, you always know your mum's cooking because of that specific spice she uses, or the type of dough she bakes with, or the way she heats it up to just the perfect temperature. Well, God has also left some signs of his existence in his creation, and I hate to say it, but they're even more impressive than your dear old mum's cooking.
I assume you're not talking about cancer, poverty, viral disease, genetic disease, earthquakes, tsunamis, infant mortalities, or thousands of incorrect religions and incorrect religious scriptures, are you?
1. The Big Bang, aka everything came from basically nothing. Come on, people. That's not normal.
No, it's not normal. I don't think anyone's ever claimed that the universe expanding from a point of infinite mass and density is a normal, everyday occurrence. I mean, it might be. There might be multiple universes or something. Who knows? The Big Bang Theory is commonly misunderstood to imply that something came from nothing. There is nothing within the evidence for the Big Bang that implies that there couldn't have been some kind of cosmic creator. Don't think that just because you believe that the Big Bang happened means that you can't believe in God. Many people believe that the Big Bang did happen and it was God who banged it. In fact, some people argue that since it was discovered that the universe had a beginning at all, that means that God must exist because there must have been some kind of first mover that set it all off. The prevailing wisdom before we discovered that the universe had a beginning was that we lived in a static universe. Einstein himself believed that we lived in a static universe that had no beginning and no end. In fact, that was one of the big problems of his life because that model of the universe didn't quite fit with his theory of relativity. But then since then, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was expanding, Penzias and Wilson discovered CMBR, and a host of evidence has been collected which suggests that the universe did in fact have a beginning around about 13.7 or 13.8 billion years ago. But here's the catch. If you're going to claim that something can exist outside of this universe that set off the Big Bang, well then so can I. And neither of our opinions are more valid. You claim that it was a god, I claim that there could be a multitude of naturalistic explanations, and some have already been postulated, for instance the multiverse theory. The only difference is, because we have no compelling evidence of the multiverse theory, at least not yet, we're not going to make any claims of absolute certainty, because that would be preposterous. And that's precisely what you seem to be doing.
The Big Bang Theory says that the universe began. Scientists like Albie hoped that the universe always existed, because they didn't want those pesky questions of where it came from turning up.
Well, when Einstein learned that the universe did have a beginning and that it was expanding, he took the resolution that he'd made to his theory of relativity to the problem that I mentioned earlier and realised that it wasn't needed at all and called it the greatest blunder of his life. He changed his mind based upon evidence. He didn't care what he wanted the universe to be like. That's ridiculous.
Unfortunately for our white-haired friend over here, the idea that the universe is eternal is wrong. Dead wrong.
Unfortunately, for Einstein, you do realise that the discovery that the universe was expanding and that it had a beginning actually solved like the biggest problem of Einstein's life and made him realise that his initial calculations about relativity were in fact correct. It was great for him.
Turns out the universe is expanding, which means it must have expanded from somewhere. We all know the famous song. Take it away, boys.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started.
Now where did that initial
Hot, dense state
come from? If something began, it had to have been begun, right? Us religious folk have always had an answer. We say that there had to have been an eternal entity which always existed, and which begins universes like ours. We call that eternal entity, drumroll please, God.
Of the gaps, just because you can't explain where the universe came from doesn't mean that you can just invoke God. You say you have an answer. You don't have an answer. You have a postulation. You have a hypothesis that's yet to be proven to be correct. You don't know that anything at all existed before the Big Bang. In fact, the question of what came before the Big Bang could be seen as a bit of a non-starter, given that before is a principle of time, and time itself began with the Big Bang. It could be seen as a ridiculous question. But even if you could prove that there was something before the Big Bang, you couldn't prove that it was a god, you couldn't prove that it was omnipotent, you couldn't prove that it was omniscient, you couldn't prove that it consciously created the universe, you couldn't prove that it created the Earth, you couldn't prove that it particularly cares about a particular species of primate on a particular rock orbiting a particular sun in a particular galaxy, in a particular galactic cluster, in perhaps a particular universe. And you certainly couldn't prove that it disapproves of homosexuality or something. So why do theists so often act as though they can? I've seen tons of convincing arguments for an arbitrary first mover, but nothing for any kind of theistic philosophy. And by the way, if you want to learn any more about cosmology or its history or how we discovered that the universe had a beginning or all the sort of stuff that I'm talking about in this video actually, I couldn't recommend Lawrence Krauss's A Universe from Nothing anymore. Fantastic book. I'm only halfway through, so I might regret saying this, but I think this might just be one of the best books that I've read in months. In fact, my random name generator has selected this month's patron of the month, who is Thomas Johnson, so congratulations to you, you've become my patron of the month, and I'm going to send you a copy of A Universe from Nothing, because it is honestly just a fantastic book. If you want to learn about how to become a patron, if you want to buy the book, links to everything will be in the description.
On the other hand, atheists are left empty-handed. They're hoping that if they stare at the universe long enough, they'll figure it out. Well, staring at the universe won't tell you about what produced the universe when it didn't exist, so good luck with that.
And neither will staring at religious scripture, or the age-old arguments of Thomas Aquinas.
2. The fine-tuning of the universe, aka, why are you here? No, really, why? Do you know the story of Goldilocks? Goldilocks was a young girl who trespassed into the house of 3 bears. Why these bears have a house, and why you'd ever break into...
Okay, I'm just going to skip this bit. You know the story of Goldilocks. 3 bowls, one's too hot, one's too cold, and one's perfect. I'm assuming you're going to make the same kind of argument about the initial conditions of the universe, right?
But the 3rd one was just right. The universe is kind of like that. No, not like porridge. It's just right for life.
You're telling me that this universe, the 99.9% vacuous universe, the universe with the Andromeda Galaxy which is heading on a direct collision course with us, the universe in which the sun will eventually expand into a red giant and consume the Earth and everything that we've ever known or loved, the Earth itself where the majority of the water is undrinkable, where earthquakes and natural disasters routinely ruin people's lives, need I go on? The universe is not finely tuned for human life.
If the early conditions or the basic laws of the universe were even a little bit different, life could never exist. For instance, the following list shows you just a few examples of how sensitive the universe is to change. If any of these ratios changed even a tiny amount, it would be physically impossible for you and I to exist. And that would be a tragedy.
Now this sounds familiar, doesn't it? If you don't already know, my last video was discussing this exact topic, actually, so if you want to see my rebuttal to this kind of argument, go and check it out. Link in the description, might be in the related videos. It's my video about dice.
But instead of getting all mopey-eyed about it, we should be asking ourselves, what are the chances? If the universe just popped into existence by accident, whatever that means, the chances would be effectively zero. But if the universe was designed with the specific purpose of producing life, like every religion says, then that would explain a lot, wouldn't it?
Okay, so all of the theistic religions which invoke a supernatural creator, Christianity, Islam, ancient Greek mythology, Judaism, the thousands of religions which do that, could all be correct. I suppose that narrows it down slightly.
3. Origins and evolution, aka stardust, turns into little cells, that turn into little people. Aww. Did you ever play with Lego? If so, let me ask you a question. If you take a box of broken up Lego and shake it up, how likely is it that a Lego building drops out? Or a Lego helicopter? Or the Lego movie Batman, walking, talking and busting up criminals? Pretty unlikely, right? Because we all know that to make any of these things, you need very specific configurations of building blocks that work together to produce a useful outcome.
Okay, but say I randomly arranged some Lego and it created some kind of arbitrary structure, and then I assigned some kind of meaning to that after the fact, that wouldn't be so amazing, would it? I mean, if the configuration had been any different, then that meaning wouldn't make any sense. But that's not very extraordinary because, of course, I applied that meaning. And that's precisely what we've done with the universe too. The only reason that the current conditions of the universe are extraordinary in any way is from a viewpoint of anthropocentrism, that we are important, that the universe wanted or needed for life in our form to exist, which it certainly didn't. And again, I talked about this in more detail in my last video and in another video I did on the teleological argument, which again will be linked in the ever-growing description.
We can all learn a lot from Lego. Just as we know it's practically impossible for building blocks with no will of their own to come together to produce useful and interesting things, we also know that dead chemicals should not be able to arrange themselves into living systems. And yet, that's exactly what we see.
Yes, that is exactly what we see, which means that it does happen. Have you ever heard of natural selection? I know there are a lot of people out there who deny it, but I'll tell you what, let's look at a logical way to try and prove that natural selection did happen. Forget about fossils and genetics and just agree with me on 3 things, which, by the way, I can't actually for the life of me remember where I first heard them. So if these sound familiar to you and you know where you first heard them, do let me know, because if it's where I also first heard them, I'd love to be able to link it in the description. But agree with me on these 3 things. Firstly, inheritance. Offspring inherit characteristics from their parents. Agreed? Cool. Number 2, mutation. In the duplication of genes, sometimes things go wrong and the copy isn't perfect, and there's some kind of genetic malfunction. This is how bacteria evolve, for instance, to resist antibiotics. I'm sure we can agree on that too. So let's move on to the third. Number 3, if you have a multitude of biological or chemical structures with different characteristics, then in any given environment, those which have mutated in such a fashion which gives them better prospects for survival in that environment will be more likely to survive and therefore outlast the others. Okay, if we can agree that these 3 things happen, if we can agree that these 3 things are true, then natural selection must have happened and must still be happening. Now, many creationists, or just people who are bewildered by the idea that one species might be able to evolve into another, often bring up the contention that perhaps this kind of evolution by natural selection does happen on the micro scale, but not in the macro scale, or in other words, it happens on the small scale, but not on the large. Now, I've heard a lot of people say this, but to me it just sounds like you're saying that, you know, a hike of 30 miles, you don't believe that a journey on foot of 30 miles could take place because a single step is only about this big. Well, yeah, of course, but if you take the individual small steps and you put them together, you get the entire journey. And hey presto, that's how evolution works.
The chance arrangement of DNA to produce even a simple protein is mind-bogglingly unlikely.
Not if you consider that this protein has had billions of years to evolve gradually to the complexity that we see today in such a way that makes it fit within its environment rather than being designed to fit within an environment. Then it's just natural selection and makes perfect sense.
Now imagine millions of these proteins working together in millions of cells to produce living beings like you and I.
I don't have to imagine it. I can see it with a microscope, and I can understand how it happened by learning about evolution.
If you honestly think that this is the product of random processes, then perhaps you need to go back to the Lego box.
Or perhaps you need to go back to the biology classroom to realise that natural selection is not a random process. Natural selection is a non-random process which capitalises upon random genetic mutations. Evolution by natural selection is a beautiful example of a scientific principle which allows for the rise of non-random results from initially random processes, i.e. genetic mutations. It's absolutely stunning, and we're so lucky that we live in a time where we're able to answer. We have answers. We have libraries full of answers to the contentions that you're currently raising. And I don't blame you for raising these contentions, but once you have even an elementary understanding of their answers, you'll come to realise that naturalistic explanations for the rise of life on this planet are far more not only compelling, but also far more awesome than any kind of supernatural explanation. But anyway, we have reached the end of the video, so I'd love to hear what you guys think about some of the topics that I've talked about in this video, so be sure to leave a comment. I'd like to just announce on a video, because I realise I haven't actually done so yet, that my website is back up and running. It's just a simple WordPress blog. It's a good way for me to get my written work out there, but I've never really written anything before, so I'd love to hear what you guys think. Be sure to go and check it out. You can get there through cosmicskeptic.com. Congratulations to Thomas. I really do hope that you enjoy this book as much as I've been enjoying it. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do here. Don't forget to subscribe. I've been Alex J. O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic, and I'll see you in the next one.